The illusion of control in the shadows. A myth sold to fools before the reality sets in. You think sanitizing the underworld is cinematic, a glamorous life built on precision. The truth is much darker. There is no glory here, just mechanical silence and the heavy weight of an inevitable toll. They arrive with eager eyes, blind to the fact that 95% lose their minds in year one. Survival requires an immediate erasure of identity. The absolute silence protocol is the very first lesson administered. No calls, no connections. Every trace of the past must be thoroughly severed and permanently buried. We do not engage in chaotic shootouts. We orchestrate flawless mechanical failures. The silent one-way ticket. The weight of the tool transfers the burden. A sudden realization of what the shadows demand. A single tactical cut. A minor structural breach. The vehicle becomes an unguided missile on command. We operate with the calculated precision of a surgeon. A flawless manipulation of kinetic impact points. The schedule is unforgiving. Every engineered delay or structural failure must align perfectly with their strict timeline. Empathy is a lethal vulnerability. You must become a static figure, functioning only to remove obstacles. The tools of the trade leave no recognizable signature, just an unfortunate, highly localized mechanical tragedy. They walk willingly into the trap, oblivious to the sudden structural failure waiting at the next intersection. We do not watch the final moment. We simply confirm the departure and fade into the background. The inevitable spill is just a statistic, a necessary correction to maintain the overall systemic balance. The reality shatters their cinematic fantasies. The absolute silence protocol is a heavy, suffocating blanket of dread. You watch them break. You realize the psychological toll is a slow, methodical poison in the veins. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford. The eyes of the system are always analyzing your stability. There are no blind spots. You exist purely as a functional asset until you become a liability. The job follows you home. A creeping paranoia that infects every quiet moment of your existence. You check the undercarriage 5 times every morning. The fear of a sudden structural failure consumes you. The very methods you perfect become the nightmares that constantly haunt your own shadow. Sleep is replaced by relentless calculation. You run through every operational variable until dawn breaks. The isolation sets in quickly. They realize they can never trust a single soul again. You watch them deteriorate from a safe distance, recognizing the early stages of a total psychological collapse. Every locked door feels like a fragile barrier, a temporary shield against an inevitable, silent visit. The heavy locks offer no real comfort, only the illusion of safety in a fractured environment. Trust is completely eradicated. Even the cold metal of your own instruments feels dangerously compromised. The handlers provide no reassurance, only cold directives that push you further into the mechanical void. You check your mirrors obsessively. Every pair of headlights behind you feels like a targeted removal operation. The pressure forces you off the grid, a desperate attempt to lose the invisible threats trailing you. The shadows stretch and distort. The mind plays vicious tricks when the silence becomes too loud. You search for physical evidence of your own paranoia, a desperate need to validate the crushing dread. The burden of the underworld is absolute. It slowly strips away every fragment of your former identity. The slightest error amplifies the tension. A dropped tool sounds like a heavy sentence being pronounced. You look at them and see a glaring liability, a fragile component that will inevitably fail. They sense the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden realization that they are completely expendable assets. You are entirely alone in this system, a solitary mechanic in a world of broken, disposable parts. You look in the mirror and find a stranger, a ghost who simply orchestrates inevitable, silent tragedies. The paranoia becomes your only companion. You inspect your own vehicle until the metal blurs. You constantly look over your shoulder. Every shadow hides a potential removal order with your designation. The isolation is absolute. The rear view offers nothing but empty streets and crushing silence. You trust no one. Not your handlers, not your apprentices, and definitely not your own mind. The new arrivals crave connection. They reach out, completely unaware that empathy is a fatal vulnerability. You reject their fragile attempts. Silence is the only shield that prolongs your expiration date. Every fractured connection is intentional. You sever the ties before the system uses them against you. The directives never cease. A new file always appears, demanding another flawless, highly orchestrated structural failure. You absorb the target parameters. They cease being human and become mere logistical equations to solve. You erase their existence from the records before you physically remove them from the equation. A severed sensor. A blinded computer system. The vehicle is instantly transformed into a localized hazard. The mechanical disruption is completely invisible to the untrained eye. A silent promise of sudden kinetic impact. You fade into the concrete landscape, the architect of a sudden tragedy, leaving absolutely no signature. They approach with absolute arrogance, blindly trusting a mechanical system that has already been hopelessly compromised. You observe the final departure. A calculated statistical adjustment executed with absolute, chilling silence. Even the environment remains completely indifferent. You are just a transient ghost operating within the machinery. The paranoia returns with vengeance. A microscopic noise instantly triggers the desperate protocol for survival. You hunt for phantoms in the dark, convinced the system has finally dispatched your immediate replacement. The naive assets wander into the crosshairs. Their desperate need to learn becomes a catastrophic liability. You break their illusions violently. The shadows do not forgive those who step out of line. You enforce the isolation violently. The shadows demand absolute solitary confinement to prevent a catastrophic systemic failure. The sudden realization crushes their cinematic dreams. They finally understand the lethal weight of the silence protocol. The environment steadily erodes all remaining humanity. You are left with nothing but cold mechanical instincts. The sanctuary offers no actual relief. The creeping dread simply follows you through the locked steel doors. You hunt for invisible electronic eyes, convinced the handlers are constantly monitoring your accelerating psychological decay. The tools of the trade become objects of intense suspicion. Even cold steel cannot be blindly trusted. They monitor your inevitable decline from a distance, calculating the exact moment you transition into a liability. The electronic pulse dictates your fragile sanity. Every silent signal confirms the deep, inescapable roots of paranoia. They prepare for the next mechanical tragedy. The fear is visible, a permanent stain on their conscience. You look at the eager asset and see a targeted removal order. The ultimate betrayal feels imminent. They descend blindly into the fatal architecture. The trap is perfectly calibrated for maximum kinetic impact. A loosened bracket, a sudden loss of balance. Gravity executes the final directive with absolute, unquestionable efficiency. The inevitable spill occurs exactly on schedule. A tragic urban accident, mathematically engineered by the unseen shadows. You never linger for the aftermath. The static figures are left behind as you fade into nothingness. The phantom headlights pursue you endlessly. The psychological toll permanently alters your perception of a safe environment. You accelerate rapidly into the void, a desperate, futile attempt to outrun the demons you personally constructed. The adrenaline crashes violently, leaving behind an empty shell of a man entirely consumed by his profession. The fragile assets always panic. They break the silence protocol and instantly sign their own invisible death warrant. The system registers the unauthorized signal immediately. The fatal error is processed with terrifying, bureaucratic, mechanical efficiency. The next directive glows in the darkness, a grim confirmation that the cycle of elimination never truly ends. The final directive is absolute. A rogue component must be systematically removed to preserve the entire network. You prepare the instrument of their departure. The emotional detachment is a heavy armor against the inevitable. The digital coordinates offer no explanation. The system simply demands a localized tragedy to restore the operational silence. Panic forces their hand. The fragile assets realize the shadows are rapidly closing in on their position. You become the inevitable consequence, tracking the panicked errors of a doomed asset through the miserable weather. You approach the target silently. The darkness embraces your arrival as you prepare for the necessary correction. The fatal manipulation is swift. A compromised hydraulic system guarantees a devastating kinetic impact at high velocity. The invisible sabotage leaves no immediate trace, a catastrophic mechanical failure waiting patiently for the next ignition. You restore the illusion of safety. The structural trap is set and perfectly hidden from untrained eyes. They run blindly toward their departure. The overwhelming fear drives them directly into the waiting mechanical trap. You watch them struggle with the inevitable. The cold detachment feels heavier than any physical burden carried. The engine roars. The final journey begins under the false assumption of a successful, desperately improvised escape. You confirm the asset is mobile. The system prepares to record the sudden, unavoidable loss of traction. The variables align flawlessly. Speed, weather, and a severely compromised braking system guarantee an absolute structural tragedy. The tremors start without warning. The psychological pressure cracks the heavy armor you spent years perfectly forging. The shattered remnants mark the exact point of departure. Another silent problem permanently removed from the equation. You wash away the physical dirt, but the heavy stains on your conscience are entirely permanent fixtures. The ledger is balanced. The handlers simply cross out the obsolete data and prepare the next assignment. The cycle of fear never ends. You orchestrate the tragedies, but constantly expect to be the victim. The steel cage offers no actual sanctuary, just a temporary holding cell until the next encrypted directive. The nightmares are completely relentless. You hear the deafening screech of tearing metal every time you close your eyes. You inspect the undercarriage obsessively, convinced that the handlers have finally authorized your inevitable, silent extraction. The rust is a creeping disease. It consumes the metal just as the paranoia slowly consumes your fractured sanity. You doubt your own actions. The overwhelming dread forces you to verify every single mechanical detail repeatedly. Trust is a foreign concept. Every stranger walking through the door is a potential kinetic threat to your existence. They document your psychological decay. Every anxious twitch is mathematically recorded to evaluate your remaining operational stability. The obsession dictates your every movement. A dropped key becomes an excuse to hunt for hidden, fatal anomalies. The concrete offers no comfort, only a stark reminder of the hard, unforgiving surface where the failures always land. The silence amplifies every microscopic noise. You react to phantoms, treating shadows like highly trained tactical executioners. You lock the entire world out. But the most dangerous threats are already permanently trapped inside your own head. You tear apart your own instruments. The overwhelming suspicion leaves absolutely nothing intact or completely trusted. The fourth inspection offers zero relief. The terrifying possibility of a sudden mechanical failure remains a suffocating weight. The mirror reflects a ghost, a highly efficient tool that has outlived its original human programming. The cycle forcibly restarts itself. The shadows do not allow for hesitation or unauthorized breaks in the operation. The system delivers a new variable, not a target for removal, but a fresh component ready for immediate integration. The past is instantly erased by black ink. They are completely stripped of identity before they even arrive. The fifth check before departure. A permanent, desperate ritual to survive just one more localized assignment. You wait in the absolute darkness, preparing to initiate the next naive asset into the relentless meat grinder. They walk in with cinematic delusions, completely blind to the brutal psychological toll waiting to instantly crush them. You look at the replacement and see a mirror, a tragic reflection of an inevitable silent doom. They bring shiny tools and unbreakable confidence, a pathetic shield against the crushing weight of the shadows. You show them the physical scars of the trade, the heavy toll exacted by countless silent corrections. Every scratch is a permanent record, a localized tragedy, successfully engineered to preserve the overarching systemic balance. The arrogant smile always fades quickly, replaced by the cold, creeping realization of their expendable nature. The absolute silence protocol is instantly enforced, a desperate attempt to delay their inevitable structural failure. They despise the primitive tools, ignorant that these crude instruments are the only defense against immediate removal. You force them into the dirt immediately. The sanitary illusions must be violently shattered without any hesitation. The darkness consumes everything it touches, a slow, inevitable spill that permanently stains the human soul. They slide into the mechanical grave. The cold metal instantly begins draining their fragile remaining humanity. You provide the instruments of destruction, watching them blindly accept the terrible burden of the shadows. The system constantly monitors the integration, calculating the exact moment the new asset becomes a lethal instrument. The slightest error echoes loudly, a physical reminder that the underworld punishes incompetence with extreme silent prejudice. You enforce the discipline mercilessly. A dropped tool is a catastrophic liability that invites a permanent departure. The terrifying reality finally breaks their spirit. They recognize the fatal boundaries of their new mechanical existence. You walk away from their weakness. The empathy was surgically removed from your programming years ago. We are all permanently trapped in the artificial light, desperately fluttering against a system designed to crush us. The authority is a hollow illusion. The crushing paranoia remains the only true master of your fate. They witness your severe psychological decay, a terrifying preview of their own inevitable descent into the void. You shatter the glass to break the connection. Vulnerability is a fatal infection that must be aggressively purged. You prepare the final transfer of power. A silent judgment passed onto the next disposable, naive component. You carry the heavy burden of the shadows, preparing to pass the invisible curse forward. You look at them and see a finalized sentence. A tragedy waiting to unfold silently. The rubber shields your hands, but nothing protects the mind from the permanent internal decay. They hesitate at the final threshold, sensing the immense, fatal weight of the irreversible choice. Empathy is completely removed from the equation. You force them to accept their new reality. They take the instrument of their doom. The system welcomes another temporary, highly disposable asset. The handlers record the successful transfer. The bureaucratic machinery grinds forward without a single pause. The digital confirmation is absolute. You are instantly rendered obsolete by a few lines of code. You leave them in the dark. The cycle of silent corrections demands your immediate departure. The paranoia never releases its grip. Every shadow still feels like an imminent structural failure. You witness the beginning of their end. A tragic sequence initiated with mechanical, cold precision. You step back into the chaotic void. A permanent ghost wandering through an indifferent environment. The shadows simply reclaim their own. The absolute silence protocol eventually erases everyone involved. They are locked in the machine, abandoned to face the crushing weight of the underworld alone. The exit is permanently sealed. The system does not allow anyone to walk away intact. The phantom threats are always waiting. The psychological torture continues long after the assignment concludes. You check the undercarriage again, a hopeless ritual performed by a completely shattered, obsolete instrument. The reality of the underworld breaks everyone. 95% go entirely insane in the first year. You think you can survive the silent corrections? The shadows will test your absolute limits. Subscribe if you dare to endure the darkness. The next localized tragedy is already scheduled.